There are seasons in life when progress feels like walking uphill through a dense, silent fog. You move forward step by step, not because anyone is watching, not because anyone is applauding, but because something within you refuses to stop. You keep your promise to yourself in the quiet hours, yet outside the world feels still. No recognition, no affirmation, no familiar voice saying, "I see you, I'm proud of you." You wonder if the climb matters when no one notices the weight you carry or the quiet storms you've endured. But it's within this very aloneness that a deeper strength begins to awaken, a strength untouched by praise, untouched by performance. It is the kind of strength that does not require an audience to rise. Carl Jung once said that every true transformation begins with dissolution. When all external support vanishes, when there is no one left to lean on, it may feel like the end. But what if it's not a collapse but initiation? What if your isolation is not punishment but preparation? This is the sacred space where your soul begins to take the lead. It is in this silence that you start to unearth a new power, the power to become your own source of momentum. In today's journey, we will walk through 7 profound steps that reveal how to rise when no one else stands with you. Because there comes a point when waiting to be rescued only delays the truth. The moment you stop reaching outward for permission to move forward, you begin to uncover the one source that was never missing, your own inner light. Everything you've spent years chasing, approval, connection, courage, has always lived inside you. It has simply been waiting for this precise moment of stillness to emerge. And when it does, you don't just keep going. You become something new. You become the one who no longer needs to be seen to shine. You walk not in search of light, but as the light itself. There are seasons when life quietly withdraws from your grasp. The conversations that once lit you up now feel hollow. The people who used to walk beside you begin to drift, not in anger, but as if your frequencies no longer match. Outwardly, everything appears intact. Your job, your relationships, your daily routine. But inwardly, a subtle unraveling has begun. And while no one warns you about this stage, Carl Jung did. He called it the beginning of the night sea journey, the soul's descent into the unknown. It is not a breakdown. It is the breaking away from illusions. When the world you once clung to no longer feels like home, your soul starts seeking a deeper truth. But to cross the threshold into that truth, you must first walk through the most ancient shadow of all, loneliness. The loneliness Jung spoke of isn't about being physically alone. It is a deeper, more disorienting silence. The moment you realize that what once made you feel connected no longer reaches your soul. You can still laugh, still engage, still show up, but something within has gone quiet. It's as if the external world is speaking a language your inner self no longer understands. And suddenly, you're left face to face with yourself, stripped of distraction, exposed to your own gaze. Many interpret this silence as failure, but Jung saw it differently. He believed this was the very sign that your soul was shedding its mask, the persona you wore to belong. The painful feeling that no one understands me is not evidence that you've gone off track. It's the moment your true self begins to stir beneath the surface. In today's culture, we are conditioned to fill the silence through work, relationships, busyness, and noise. But the more we avoid the void, the louder it calls. Jung taught that healing begins not when someone listens to us, but when we finally dare to listen to ourselves. I once knew a woman who, after her marriage ended, found herself in a haunting quiet. Once surrounded by invitations, voices, and light, she now stood in an apartment echoing with absence. But instead of rushing to escape it, she chose to remain. At first, only for a few minutes each evening, then longer. She cooked simple meals for herself. She journaled, she sat with the ache, and in time, that ache transformed. I used to fear the silence, she told me. Now, it's where I find my truth. That moment, that shift, is what Jung called the meeting with the self. The return not to who you were, but to who you've always been beneath the noise. Loneliness, when embraced, becomes sacred. It's not here to weaken you. It's the sacred weight that strengthens the core of your being. Like a climber without a rope, every step becomes intentional. Every decision becomes a vow to yourself. And those small vows, kept in the dark, forge a resilience no applause can offer. Just as the oak stands alone in the dead of winter, bare, silent, unseen, so too must the soul grow, unseen roots before spring. Jung once wrote, "In all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder, a secret order." So if you find yourself in the cold night of solitude, do not run. You are not falling apart. You are falling inward, into the one place where real strength is born, into the only place where your soul has been waiting to rise. There comes a sacred moment in your healing when you must stop waiting for someone else to reassure you. When the silence becomes unbearable, not because you're truly alone, but because you've handed your sense of worth to the responses of others. That's when the soul begins to whisper a difficult truth. The emptiness you're trying to fill is not about loneliness, it's about dependence. Carl Jung once wrote, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that matter most." In other words, what hurts most is not solitude itself, but the unmet longing to be fully seen and understood by another. Yet, the more we chase after that validation, the more we drift from ourselves. There is a woman I once met in a therapeutic circle who said, "When my boyfriend doesn't text me back, it feels like I vanish." She would stare at her screen for hours, inventing stories, replaying conversations, searching for reassurance that never came. Her anxiety wasn't about the delay, it was about a deeper wound. She shared that as a child, whenever she cried, her mother would look away or say, "You're too sensitive." Over time, her body learned a dangerous message. If no one responds, I must not matter. Jung called this pattern emotional projection, the unconscious tendency to use another person as a mirror to reflect back your values. And the tragedy is, when they stop reflecting it, your whole self-image crumbles. This is where many break, but it's also where the transformation begins. Because real freedom starts the moment you stop outsourcing your emotional safety. It doesn't mean shutting people out or becoming indifferent. It means choosing to become the one who sees and soothes the emotions no one else stayed to hold. When sadness arises, you don't panic. You place your hand on your chest, breathe deeply, and say, "I see you, I'm here." That simple act is not just self-soothing. It is the beginning of individuation, the psychological rebirth of becoming whole. You will know you're growing when silence no longer feels like rejection, when a lack of reply doesn't spiral into self-doubt, when you can sit in a cafe, alone, and feel no less worthy than those laughing in a crowd. You'll stop begging for validation because you've become the one who validates your own soul. Emotional independence is not the absence of love. It's the maturity to love without losing yourself. And when others leave, you grieve, but you don't collapse because someone stayed. You. And that is the root of true strength. When you no longer need to be saved because you've learned to never abandon yourself again. There comes a moment in every healing journey when strength is no longer measured by how loudly you cry out, but by how silently you choose to rise. After you've learned to endure solitude and become your own sanctuary, a deeper challenge emerges, one that is quiet, insidious, and often disguised as truth. It is the impulse to complain. Complaining is not just venting, it is the subtle language of the victim ego, the inner voice that clings to powerlessness because it fears the cost of change. It whispers, "This is unfair," and seduces you into rehearsing your pain until it becomes your identity. Carl Jung called this the shadow of self-pity, the part of the unconscious that feeds off blame and delay. Each complaint is not just a sentence, it is a silent agreement to stay where you are. When you speak from complaint, you unknowingly send a message to your own psyche. I have no power here. And the more you repeat that story, the more your unconscious accepts it as fate. That is the danger. The ego seeks comfort in narratives where someone else is responsible for your suffering. But the cost of that comfort is your freedom. Jung warned us that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Complaint is one of the ego's favorite tools to stay in control without actually doing the work of transformation. It feels like movement, but it keeps you standing still. We all know the phrases, "I'm so tired, no one sees me. I try and try, but nothing changes." They seem harmless, even relatable, but each one slowly drains the soul's fire. Each one builds a wall between the present and your potential. Real growth begins the moment you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What can I do with this?" That question doesn't ignore pain, it reclaims it. It turns the wound into a seed. A woman once told me that after a painful betrayal, she spoke about it for months, repeating the same story to different friends, hoping the echo would heal her. One night, she wrote in her journal, "If no one were listening, would I still tell this story?" The answer shattered her. She realized she was keeping her pain alive by retelling it. The next morning, she began writing not about what hurt her, but about what she wanted to become. That was the moment she began to heal. Stopping a complaint is not about suppressing emotion. It's about choosing not to rehearse a narrative that leaves you powerless. You can grieve, you can rage, you can cry, but at some point, you must also ask, now what? Each small action, each shift in question becomes a thread pulling you out of the shadow. That is how you rise, not through noise, but through responsibility, through the quiet decision to stop narrating the wound and begin embodying the healing. Learn to become the source of your own validation once you've moved past the temptation to complain and have taken your first steps into self-directed action. An even greater trial begins. The quiet ache of invisibility. You show up, you work with integrity, you pour your heart into what you do, and still there is no applause, no recognition, no witness. This is where most people retreat. Not because the work is too hard, but because being unseen feels unbearable. Yet this silence is not punishment. It is an initiation. It is the universe asking, can you continue to rise when no one is watching? Carl Jung once said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, because true self-acceptance means you are no longer performing for the gaze of others. You are no longer defined by likes, praise, or attention. You become your own mirror, your own compass, your own quiet sanctuary. Validation from within is not a performance. It is a return to the self, the deeper center of your being that acts not for reward, but from truth. In mythology, Cassandra was given the gift of foresight, but was cursed to never be believed. She saw the future, but her voice was dismissed as madness. Still, she did not fall silent. She kept speaking, not for recognition, but because she could not betray what she knew. Her story is not just a tragedy. It is a mirror for every soul that honors its truth, even when no one claps. In a world addicted to performance, the one who dares to speak without approval becomes a light others cannot ignore. I once met a woman who worked late every night, driven not by ego, but by devotion. Yet every time awards were given, her name was missing. "I felt invisible," she told me, but something in her changed the day she realized the emptiness of waiting for praise. She began to celebrate herself. After each project, she noted what she did well. She took herself for coffee, read a book in the sun, reclaimed joy as her own witness. "I stopped needing recognition," she said. "I started needing honesty with myself." That is the movement from ego to self, from needing proof to embodying presence. Jungian psychology teaches us that the self does not seek the spotlight. It becomes the light. The people who carry quiet power are often those who once stood in the shadows and chose not to shrink. They did not rise because they were seen. They were seen because they had already risen. External validation, at best, is a passing echo, but self-recognition is an eternal root. When you stop searching for your worth in other people's eyes, you begin to feel it in your own skin. That is the moment you stop trying to prove and start learning to glow. And no applause can match the power of that inner flame. Rise quickly. Let the fall ignite you. It is a strange paradox of transformation. Just when you believe you've become stronger, more centered, more conscious, life brings you to your knees again. Have you ever noticed that? Just when you think you've outgrown your pain, something cracks you open in the exact place you thought had healed. That is not regression. That is the psyche calling for a deeper integration. True failure is not a collapse of the external world. It is the inner rupture when the path you believed in begins to tremble under your feet. And in that tremble, old patterns resurface. You wonder, have I really grown at all? The old self, still hungry for approval, whispers, maybe it's easier to be who they loved. At least then I wasn't alone. But as Jung taught us, the fall is never meant to destroy. It is an invitation. Each descent is a mirror. When you fall, you are not breaking. You are meeting the part of yourself that still longs to be seen, accepted, and reintegrated. That is the return of the shadow. It's not a punishment, it's an awakening. It shows you the part of you that still clings to recognition, that trembles under criticism, that shrinks when misunderstood. And yet, when you rise again, not for applause, not for validation, but for yourself, something extraordinary happens. Yourself, the deeper core of your being, expands. Jung once wrote to Freud, "Mistakes are, after all, the foundations of truth." To stumble is not to fail. It is to strip away illusion and encounter what is real. I remember a woman who built a business with care and heart, only to lose it to betrayal. She spiraled into guilt, shame, and silence. But her turning point came when her therapist asked, "What if this wasn't failure, but a lesson?" In that stillness, she admitted, "I never listened to my intuition." And that was the doorway. She began journaling daily, not to dwell in pain, but to make meaning from it. A year later, she reopened her business, smaller, wiser, steadier. "Now I'm not afraid to fall," she said, "because every fall makes me more honest with myself." Neuroscience agrees. When you fall, your brain processes the rupture between what you hoped and what is. If you respond with fear, your nervous system locks down. But if you take one small action, write one truth, take one breath, speak one boundary, your brain releases the chemistry of healing. Progress is not grand, it is often invisible, but every act of self-trust awakens your future. Like the phoenix that dives into fire to be reborn, we are not destroyed by the flames, we are remade by them. What burns is not your essence. What burns is the old skin that cannot hold who you're becoming. As Jung said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. You are not failing, you are awakening. And if you choose to stand again, this time for yourself, what rises is not just a survivor. It is a soul that fire could not consume. Act even when your spirit feels still. Move not from mood, but from meaning. There comes a deeper turning point in the journey, not just the ability to rise from the ashes, but the discipline to walk forward before the fire reignites. In the quiet after the fall, when no applause follows your effort and no energy stirs your chest, the soul offers its final test. Will you act without the warmth of inspiration? Will you move even when nothing in you feels ready? Jung spoke of will not as force, but as a sacred energy, capable of reshaping the inner world, realigning the psyche toward purpose when emotion falters. Will, he said, is the bridge between desire and destiny. Inspiration is a beautiful visitor, but it cannot be depended upon. It floats like air, here one day, gone the next. But will is the anchor. It is the hand that writes, even when the mind resists, the step taken, even when the heart hesitates. Acting only when you feel inspired is still the domain of the ego, the part of you that seeks ease, comfort, and reward. But when you transcend this pattern and act in the service of something larger than comfort, you awaken the self, the eternal within. Discipline becomes your devotion. Effort becomes prayer. There will be mornings when your spirit feels gray, when silence fills the room and meaning feels far away. But if on that day you rise anyway, even for 5 minutes, you are no longer moved by circumstance. You are moved by inner alignment. I think of a woman I know, a single mother working 2 jobs, whose exhaustion left no room for dreams. One evening, her young son asked her, "What happened to your dream, Mom?" That question shattered the numbness. That night, she made a quiet vow, not to wait for inspiration, but to begin again out of devotion to herself. She rose each morning 15 minutes earlier. She wrote 3 goals. She saved coins for her dream, a small bakery. No fanfare, no support, just quiet, consistent will. A year later, that bakery opened, not because she was inspired, but because she refused to abandon herself. Jung once said, "Freedom of will is the ability to do gladly that which I must do." True freedom is not the ability to choose what feels good. It is the ability to act on what is right, even when it feels heavy. Those who carry true will are not devoid of emotion. They feel deeply, but they are no longer ruled by it. They move in service of something more permanent, their values, their responsibility to their soul, their vision of a life built with integrity. They become the guide of their emotions, not the captive. And over time, a strange thing happens. From the soil of that discipline, inspiration blooms again, not as a starting point, but as a reward for staying the course. So, if today you feel uninspired, unsupported, uncertain, take one step, not because you feel ready, but because the path is ready for you. You do not need the world to understand you. The longing to be seen is natural, but it is not essential. There comes a quiet moment after all the invisible effort when you realize you've done everything your soul has asked, kept moving, stayed honest, and remained devoted to a path few could walk. And yet the world remains silent. No hand reaches for yours, no applause echoes back. The room stays still, and in that stillness, a subtle ache begins to bloom. Did any of it matter? This is the final threshold, the moment when the soul asks not for recognition, but for return, a return to the self. When we ache for understanding, we are still searching for mirrors to reflect our worth. But others cannot mirror what they cannot see. No one will ever fully grasp the terrain you've crossed within, the silent nights, the collapsed dreams, the quiet rebuilding of your strength. Carl Jung once wrote, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. The wisdom you seek is not out there in someone's eyes, but within the still waters of your unconscious. You must be still enough to hear them, because truth does not shout. It whispers. For years, we lived to be understood by lovers, by parents, by society. But there comes a time when you realize not everyone is capable of seeing your depth. Many can only handle the version of you that asks for nothing. It is not their fault. In a world where everyone is still searching for themselves, few have the clarity to truly witness another soul. And in that realization, something sacred begins. You stop asking others to complete your story. You begin to listen to your own rhythm. And in that return inward, your fears and your fire, your longing and your light begin to harmonize. There is no longer a need to prove that you are enough. You feel it, not as ego, but as truth. I once heard the story of a young artist who, after years of chasing relevance, fell into creative fatigue. One day, she disappeared into solitude, a cabin by the lake. No audience, no noise. She painted only what her soul asked to speak. And when she returned, her work had changed, raw, alive, unmistakably real. A gallery found her not because she tried to be seen, but because she had finally seen herself. That's the paradox Jung understood. The moment you stop searching outwardly, you become a center of gravity. Like a lighthouse, your still presence begins to guide others, not by noise, but by being. As Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Real transformation is not born from being understood by others, but from fully accepting yourself, your contradictions, your scars, your sacred center. And strangely, when you no longer seek validation, you begin to radiate the quiet energy that draws the right people, the right paths, the right love. Not because you needed them, but because you became whole without them. The one who rises when no one is watching is not without wounds. They are simply someone who has turned their solitude into insight, their silence into strength, and their lowest points into sacred ground. They are not driven by applause, but by an inner vow to stay loyal to their soul. When the world grows quiet, they no longer panic. They listen. When belief from others fades, they cultivate a quiet, enduring faith in themselves. From that still, forgotten place within, a different kind of power is born. Not loud, not showy, but unmistakably real. It is a strength that does not need to be proven because it is rooted in truth. In the end, the journey is not about becoming invulnerable, but about becoming honest with your fears, your longings, and your inner light. When you finally stop waiting for someone to rescue you, you'll see you were never helpless. You just hadn't yet discovered the fierce grace already alive within you. If something in this message stirred your spirit, pass it on. Someone out there may need the same mirror you just found. And remember to subscribe, because the path of becoming truly yourself doesn't end here. It's only beginning. A path of clarity, wholeness, and quiet courage, even when you must walk it alone. If this touched something sacred inside you, don't let it fade into silence. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your presence here is not just support, it's resonance. And if you feel moved to give back, your donation becomes a quiet but powerful gesture that helps keep this light alive for others still walking in the dark.